The rain had not stopped for hours, and by 2 o'clock in the morning the city looked like it had surrendered to silence. The streets shimmered beneath the streetlights while empty sidewalks stretched endlessly into the darkness. I never imagined that a simple decision to help someone that night would completely rewrite the future I had accepted for myself. I thought I was only driving my drunk boss home after another exhausting work event. Instead, I found myself standing on the front porch of a house where one sentence from a woman I had never met before would uncover a truth that would change my life forever. Before we continue, if you believe that kindness always finds its way back, that everyone deserves a second chance, and that one good deed can change a life forever, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these heartfelt stories reach more people around the world. At 29 years old, I had become an expert at surviving without expecting anything good to happen. My name was Ethan, and I worked as a financial analyst in a company where long hours were rewarded with even longer hours. My apartment was barely large enough to hold a bed, a tiny kitchen table, and a stack of unpaid bills that grew thicker every month. My father had passed away years earlier after a long illness that drained every dollar our family had. My mother worked herself into exhaustion trying to keep us afloat before she eventually became sick herself. By the time I entered adulthood, hope had become a luxury I could no longer afford. I believed life was nothing more than enduring one difficult day until the next. My boss, Richard Lawson, was known throughout the company as a brilliant businessman and an impossible man to please. Employees whispered about him whenever he walked through the office because nobody wanted to become the next person embarrassed during a meeting. He rarely smiled. His standards were impossibly high, and his criticism could reduce even experienced professionals to silence. I respected his intelligence but feared his presence. Like everyone else, I assumed his cold personality extended into every part of his life. That Friday evening the company hosted an expensive celebration after securing a major contract. Everyone attended because attendance was practically mandatory. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors while executives laughed over expensive drinks. I remained near the edge of the room, quietly eating appetizers and counting the minutes until I could return home. Richard, however, drank far more than anyone had ever seen before. Glass after glass disappeared into his trembling hands as the confident executive slowly became an exhausted, broken man hiding behind expensive clothes. Near 2 in the morning, the ballroom had almost emptied. Only a few employees remained, pretending not to notice that the company's powerful leader could barely stand. One by one they quietly left, making excuses about early meetings or long drives home. I watched Richard stumble near the exit before catching himself against a wall. For several seconds I considered leaving too. After all, he had never shown me any kindness. Helping him wasn't part of my job. Yet something inside me refused to abandon another human being in that condition. Maybe it was because I remembered carrying my own father when illness stole his strength. Maybe compassion had survived inside me despite everything life had done to bury it. I offered to drive him home. He barely nodded before handing me his keys. The drive across the sleeping city felt strangely quiet. Rain tapped gently against the windshield while Richard stared out the window without speaking. His expensive suit looked wrinkled and tired, almost matching the expression on his face. Halfway through the drive he whispered something I could barely hear. He wasn't talking to me. He was apologizing to someone named Emily. The name repeated several times before he fell silent again. For the first time since joining the company, I realized the intimidating executive beside me wasn't simply a boss. He was a man carrying invisible pain. We finally reached a beautiful house surrounded by old oak trees. Warm lights glowed behind the curtains despite the late hour. I walked him carefully to the front door, expecting to leave immediately afterward. Before I could knock, the door opened as though someone had been waiting all night. A woman in her late 50s stood there wearing a simple sweater instead of anything elegant. Her eyes looked exhausted but gentle. She didn't appear angry about her husband's condition. Instead, she looked relieved that someone had brought him home safely. As we guided Richard inside, she thanked me with a sincerity that caught me completely off guard. Then she looked directly into my eyes and quietly said that I was the first employee in 7 years who had cared enough to bring her husband home instead of leaving him alone. Those words landed with unexpected weight, but what she said next changed everything. She explained that Richard had once been one of the kindest people anyone could ever meet. Everything changed after their only son died in a car accident caused by a drunk driver. Since then, Richard had buried himself in work because success was the only place where grief couldn't reach him. Every employee believed they worked for a heartless man, but she still remembered the loving father who had disappeared beneath years of heartbreak. Her voice never accused anyone. It simply carried the quiet exhaustion of someone who had loved another person through unimaginable pain. Suddenly every harsh meeting, every impossible deadline, every cold expression looked different. None of it excused the way Richard treated people, but it reminded me that every stranger is fighting battles invisible to everyone else. She invited me inside for coffee before driving home. Family photographs lined the hallway. One picture showed Richard laughing beside a teenage boy holding a baseball trophy. Another captured the three of them on a beach, smiling as though sadness could never exist. The contrast between those photographs and the lonely man I had driven home felt almost unbearable. As we talked, she learned about my own struggles. I mentioned my mother's worsening health, the hospital bills, and the second job I worked every weekend just to keep us afloat. She listened without interrupting. Before I left, she thanked me again, saying that kindness shown without expecting a reward is the rarest gift anyone can offer. I drove home before sunrise feeling strangely different, although I couldn't explain why. Monday morning arrived like every other workday. I expected nothing unusual. Richard entered the office looking serious as always, but something had changed in his eyes. He asked me to meet him privately. My heart pounded as I wondered whether I had somehow embarrassed him by witnessing his weakness. Instead, he thanked me quietly. He admitted he remembered very little about that night, but his wife had told him everything. For several moments he simply stared out the office window before confessing that he had spent years punishing the world for pain it never caused. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He only wanted an opportunity to become someone his son would have been proud of. Over the following months, changes spread through the company so gradually that many people barely noticed them at first. Meetings became conversations instead of interrogations. Employees were encouraged to spend evenings with their families instead of staying unnecessarily late. Mental health support programs appeared. Scholarships were created for employees' children. Richard personally established a charitable foundation supporting families who had lost loved ones to drunk driving. The man everyone feared slowly became someone people genuinely respected. The greatest surprise came several weeks later when Richard called me into his office once again. Instead of another assignment, he offered me a leadership position overseeing a new division. I immediately assumed someone more experienced deserved the opportunity. Richard smiled faintly before explaining that skills can be taught, but character cannot. He said the company needed leaders who remembered compassion even when nobody was watching. For the first time in years, I felt someone believed in me before I believed in myself. The promotion transformed more than my career. It allowed me to move my mother into a better apartment closer to her doctors. Her treatments improved. The constant fear of unpaid bills slowly disappeared. For the first time since losing my father, our home echoed with laughter instead of quiet anxiety. Every improvement traced back to one decision made on a rainy night when I chose not to walk away from someone who seemed undeserving of kindness. Months later, Richard invited me and my mother to a memorial charity event honoring his son. Hundreds of families attended. Instead of speeches celebrating business achievements, the evening celebrated ordinary people who had chosen compassion during someone else's darkest moment. Looking around that room, I realized every life is connected in ways we rarely understand. One act of kindness creates another, then another, until entire communities begin changing because one person refused to become indifferent. If this story has touched your heart so far, please like the video, share it with your friends and family, subscribe to the channel, and let us know that stories of hope still matter. Your support allows more people to discover reminders that kindness can truly change lives. Standing beside Richard that evening, I finally understood something my father once tried to teach me before he passed away. People rarely reveal the storms they carry inside. Some wear expensive suits. Others wear old jackets. Some hide behind smiles while others hide behind anger. But every person is hoping that someone, somewhere, will choose compassion over judgment. Special request: before you reach the end of this story, please leave a comment telling us about a moment when one unexpected act of kindness changed your life or restored your faith in humanity. Your story may become the encouragement someone else desperately needs today. As the memorial ended, Richard quietly thanked everyone for believing that broken people could heal. I looked toward the night sky where gentle rain had begun falling once again, just like it had on the night everything changed. I realized fate had never promised an easy life. Instead, it offered small moments where ordinary people could choose extraordinary compassion. That rainy drive home was never about helping a drunk boss. It was about discovering that mercy often arrives disguised as inconvenience, and that the greatest opportunities to change our own lives usually begin by changing someone else's. Ever since that unforgettable night, whenever I see someone struggling, I remember the words spoken by a tired wife standing in a doorway at 2 o'clock in the morning. Those simple words didn't just change my future, they reminded me that the world is transformed not by powerful people, but by ordinary hearts willing to care when everyone else walks away.